Thank you so much for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be here. I don't know if you came across during the previous conversations that I actually lived in the Caribbean. I was in St. Kitts for a few months, advising the government back then, in 2013, if I get it correctly. And one of the things that we discussed was the cryptocurrencies. It's just too soon, right? So back then, the idea was that they were shifting from the sugar industry, and it thought that because Nevis is a financial center and quite a small one, that would be a great place to experiment. But it's just too soon, and now we can see what happens almost a decade later. So I'm glad to see the Caribbean region and the greater region, so to say, showing the leadership and the thought. Let's say, courage to try new things of solving old problems. But the focus here being on education, I'll try to wrap it by explaining how I ended up developing this concept and how it could benefit the youth in the region and beyond. The interesting sort of loop back to the previous conversations I had with Tom, which was a fantastic session, by the way. I really, really appreciated that. Is the fact that he was so surprised that people were willing to be charitable, and they are very giving, even though they get a bad reputation, some of them probably deservedly, but we cannot put everybody in the same basket, and we need to make sure that these rewards, let's say the recognition for their efforts, have the right level of rewards, and that we show the way in terms of how other people who are willing to follow a similar path could do the same. So the very beginning of the story actually was me receiving an inheritance, which was not huge. It was several flats in Rio. And because of the Olympic Games back then, they were worth 4 times, 5 times more than a normal price. And when I received that inheriting from my dad, I felt that this was not my money. I had done nothing to earn it, and I had to give it back to society. So I started selling them and financing the development of all of my nonprofit efforts, including the ones we're discussing today, such as Wisdom Accelerator. And the outcome of that thought process was a nonprofit based in Geneva called Broadlights, which I created with a good friend of mine who's a son of the United Nations envoy, who unfortunately was killed in Baghdad during the bombing. So he was supposed to be the next United Nations Secretary General, but no, his life tragically came short. And this colleague, friend, co-founder, is the president of the foundation honoring the memory of his dad. And he was also working in telecommunications. And he was also Brazilian with an European passport. So he had lots of things in common. And back then I was talking about bringing connectivities to refugee camps. So this is 2016, 17. And he came to talk to me after my TEDx presentation and basically said, we have to do something, right? And this is how my first nonprofit was created. And what happens when you have this kind of experience that is so powerful, and we had so many things in common, and it was just so full of meaning for both of us. In fact, both of us got involved because of the deaths of our respective fathers, right? So it's as strong as it gets for men, because that's the moment when you feel that you're on your own. You don't have dad to call. And I think it's even stronger for men than it is for women. So that's something that we started developing. So the jump into the charitable activities happened because of very strong emotions. And I think that what we should try to foster with the future generations is an understanding that it can make a huge difference. And then we try to empower them by showing the way and indicating that if they identify the passion and purpose and they get the right level of support, they can achieve incredible things. And the development from that initial experience, which curiously led me today to be bringing telecommunications equipment to Ukraine, to the front line. I mean, I'm here in Davos discussing this right now. I'm meeting a minister tomorrow. I've been working with his minister for quite some time. The sense of purpose has not faded over 6-7 years since I had the original idea. And I just want to make sure that the youth today, they understand that it can be very, very powerful. And we want to show them that there's certain pathways that can facilitate the process. And that's more or less a story of the Wisdom Accelerator for youth, right? So we started from the premise that we should try to make teenagers wiser faster, which sounds really foolish, right? Because the teenage years is exactly when you're doing all the silly things in life, but every silly thing you're doing is nudging you towards wisdom. And it sounds counterintuitive to say teenagers and wisdom, but why not, right? So you have people in the past, Alexander the Great being probably the best example. He was leading an empire when he was 17 years old. Right? So they do have the potential to do great things if having the right level of support. Now, the mentor, teacher, tutor of Alexander the Great was Aristotle, as in he was pretty well backed by one of the best philosophers humanity ever created. So the question then is, how can you scale? How can I make sure that teenagers all around the world have the opportunity to experiment and fail successfully? I guess that's the expression that you want to have here. They are never going to succeed every single time. In fact, people who succeed all the time, they're not very wise because life is too easy, right? So the wisdom comes from failing, going like, oh, okay, this hurts. I'm not going to stick my finger in the power socket again. Oh, and you want to make sure that the pain is temporary and that it can share this knowledge with others. But how do you scale this kind of approach? And the answer came in a very unexpected way. So I had the experience from this first nonprofit called Broadlights. So I knew how to set up an association, how to find my co-founder, the statutes and the opening a bank account and everything else. And at some point in time, I realized that my daughter, who is actually my co-founder of the Wisdom Accelerator, she started doing quite remarkable things when she was 12, because I would take her to certain places, situations where she had the opportunity to do amazing things. I'm a member of the Explorers Club, and I know lots of members who are really insane. They're the first people, other members, of course, who died a long time ago, but they're the first to go to the North Pole, to the South Pole, to reach the summit of the Everest, to go to the bottom of the ocean. Every single person who walked on the moon is a member of the Explorers Club. So I hang out with really interesting people. And I'm actually running for office, maybe become the president of the local chapter. And I'm very, very involved and very engaged. So I just had to bring her along, right? She just has to be there. And because I've done a lot of exploration over the years, I would try to put her in a situation where she could try. So when she was 12, I took her to a very large cave system in Brazil, which is one of the most accessible, but you literally can only get in from the top, which is the equivalent of hanging from a building with 20 stories, right? So you're there hanging from around 60, 70 meters, going into darkness, and that's the only way back up again. So I took her there. I said, would you like to try this? And took a little bit of convincing, but eventually she did that. So you have a 12-year-old capable of, no, she became an amateur speleologist so, immediately after doing this. And I was so surprised because I think when I was 12, I was still struggling to do my shoelaces, right? I had a very comfortable life. And what I tried to do was to put her on edgy situations that would allow her to become wiser. This is what I can understand now in the retrospect. And she kept on doing really, really interesting things because I would take her to really interesting places. And when she was 14, she sent me a message. She lives in Denmark. I'm in Switzerland. And she was asking if she could join me at the World Economic Forum, where I am right now. I've been coming to Davos for the last 10 years or so. And I never prompted that. Like, it was her idea. She knew that she had access through me and that it was interesting through the social media posts that she had been following. I was like, oh, I'll give it a go, right? And I was asking her, why would you like to go? It's like, I follow them. I like what they do. I would like to meet them and understand how I can get more engaged, involved, or whatever words that she used back then. And I thought it was quite remarkable. So she ended up joining. The actual stories are much longer and convoluted, but the whole point is that she ended up being a public speaker, right? So she was invited to join a panel on blockchain and the future of humanity, age 14 in Davos during the World Economic Forum. Like, okay, this is now becoming really interesting. And because she had that experience, people, diplomats started saying, we need you at the international organizations. And the example that happened in her case, could have been any agency really, was the World Trade Organization. So a diplomat saw that she had done something quite remarkable for a 14-year-old. And at the World Trade Organization, you have a very steady and stable and dull and regimented approach. So this diplomat, smart as she is, said, we need more girls, we need more young people, we need more blockchain, and you have all three. It doesn't matter you're 14, right? So we want you there. So I asked her, would you like to do something like this? It was not my idea, but was there supporting her. And she said, sure, let's make it happen. So my role as the Aristotle equivalent in this case was to write the application, to find the speakers, to try to organize the logistics. But it was her session. She was a moderator at the World Trade Organization, age 15. And that's when it became just ridiculous, right? As in a 15-year-old leading the largest blockchain-related session at the largest trade organization in the world is just astonishing. And I still find it quite remarkable. So at that point in time, my concern was not about her life and her wisdom. She has had an amazing life and plenty of opportunities, but how can I scale this? There are around 1 billion people today who are between 13 and 17. How can we create a structure that allows all of them to become a little bit wiser as they define wisdom? I don't want to impose. I don't want to say this is what wise means. I just want to make sure that they have doors that they can knock on, check if it's open, or ask around, know if anyone has a key, so they can explore as well their own future. So the word philosophy actually means a love of wisdom. So we want teenagers to become philosophers. We want them to understand that this is how they're going to achieve a life worth living, which is what the Hellenistic tradition defines as eudaimonia, right? Having the good spirits guiding you, the guardian angels. And when we created the Wisdom Accelerator, the whole idea was to make sure that they will have access, right? I think especially in the Caribbean, this is very, very important. You may have a very large young population. They are very fluent in English, speak with a lovely accent that I really adore. The Caribbean accent is one of my favorites, but they don't have access, right? So they can be the brightest cookies in the jar. They are not going to be able to compete with someone, even if it's a middle-class kid in New York, London, Paris. So how can I solve the access question? And the initial answer was, let's try to bring some of these teenagers that we have to qualify, and we have to understand what the qualification process is, to places like Davos during the World Economic Forum, where they can meet each other, and we try to have as many countries represented as possible in the two editions that I had, 2019 and 20, so before COVID. And let's make sure it's fun, right? So they these 2 years they came, they'll learn how to build an igloo, how to survive an avalanche, how to live in the forest in winter. I mean, skills that basically not a single one had. Even those who grew up in Northern European countries with plenty of snow, they probably never built an igloo before. So let's make sure that this whole experience is very interesting so that they are committed, right? They really want to wake up at 6 in the morning because they really, really want to learn how to build an igloo. And then we sneakily try to get them engaged into conversations with people who were invited by the World Economic Forum to share their experience on the world scene. But I would just go there and I'll pinch a couple of the participants, say, could you please come here and talk to the teenagers about what made you wiser faster in the past? You know, what are the things that you have gone through in your life that allowed you to make better decisions, right? One of the ways to define wisdom is making the right choices at the right time for the right reason. And this is all very unique and individual. But giving them the tool set that allows them to make those choices is really, really important. And each tool set is going to be unique. But by sharing the experience with someone who has achieved a level of success in life, such as being invited to come to Davos for the World Economic Forum, it's a pretty good head start. And then that was just the original idea. Let's try to do that worldwide. Let's try to have the Caribbean edition and have all the kids from the region coming to a place and meeting entrepreneurs. And then COVID happened, right? I was like, oops, a little bit of a problem. Flying around, people from all around the world or a region, putting them in the same room for a week, that is not going to happen for quite some time. So we switched into the online edition. And so far we had close to 500 podcasts, including billionaires, the former presidents of Ecuador, really successful people, scientists, journalists, and all of them have 20 to 30 minutes to explain how they became wiser faster in the past. And all the stories are different. There are lots of commonalities, but the whole point is they had their own journeys. And some of those journeys will reflect to specific teenagers, maybe because they come from the same country, or maybe not. Maybe just go, no, wonderful that he invented the sliced bread. No, I don't like bread. No, so they're better because they have more information, but it doesn't trigger a sense of passion. But the way that I introduce it is a bit like going to a Chinese restaurant with lots of small dishes you can choose from, the dim sums. You can say like tapas, I guess in the Caribbean is more popular than Chinese food. And I want them to taste a little bit of everything that is on the menu. And at some point in time, they go like, oh, wow, I really like the cheese, or no, I don't like the peppers. But we give them the sample from people who are acknowledged as being successful in whatever they decided to do with their lives. And then we try to facilitate that path. So back to access. And that leads into the next level, which is, okay, we can get the teenagers together. COVID doesn't help, but this is going to be over at some stage. So we'll be back hopefully next January here in Davos. And then we collect lots of content which is made for teenagers. Some of these people are very successful. They speak a lot in public, but they don't talk to 13-year-olds. Right? So we're asking them to modulate. And the question that I ask all of them is, if you had half an hour to go back in time and talk to yourself to make your future life better, how would you use that time? So we tend to have a lot of wisdom packaged in a very pragmatic way, as in, I would have repeated these mistakes, I wouldn't have done this. But it's really, really interesting because it's this collection of global wisdom from highly curated speakers. But that's not enough, right? This is potentially triggering the whole tapas restaurant. I like the cheese, I don't like the peppers. But how can I get them to actually enter a cycle of continuously growing wisdom that will lead them into lives worth living? And we're talking really about 1 billion teenagers, right? It's not trivial. It's a lot easier if they're fluent in English, but we have to start somewhere, and then we'll adapt accordingly down the line. And the next phase, what we're working on right now, is what I'm calling the wisdom fleet. And it's a fleet because it has 3 ships. And the ships are mentorship, internship, and entrepreneurship. So we're trying to get the teenagers to understand that what they're learning at school is great, right? So they should go through that. Society, structures things because that's what's required for all the pieces to work together. But it's not enough. Of course, we can just say, I'll just do the absolute minimum and hope that life will take me to the right place. Probably not the most efficient and effective way to have a life worth living. So what we're trying to do is to make sure that our speakers, they can come back and then talk what we're calling the mentorship sessions about their areas of expertise, which could be social media management, could be personal finance, could be blockchain, whatever they should really be learning at school, but schools do not have the skills, the budget, or the interest in doing, right? So that's where they can get information that is acknowledged as relevant today, but they're not getting from school. And once they engage and they kind of go deeper into their areas triggering a sense of purpose, we want them to have internships, potentially with the companies founded or managed by our speakers. And these will be virtual internships. And that's where it gets really interesting for the teenagers in the Caribbean, because there's absolutely nothing preventing a bright kid in St. Kitts, and I'm mentioning St. Kitts because I live there, working for a green hydrogen company in Germany or a virtual reality startup in Silicon Valley. And those internships, they have to be pretty light. You want to make sure that they're not clashing with the school activities, so 4 to 8 hours a week, that they're flexible so that they can do nothing 1 week because they have exams, so they have to prepare, but then they catch up later, which is exactly what happens in life down the line. So we're not as regimented in our adult lives as we are when we're at school. And that they have a chance to really go deeper into areas that are of interest or particular interest to them. And eventually they will be able to apply to universities saying, I have done all of those things from St. Kitts. And the university go like, we like you already. As in, you're a teenager, but you have a track record that is quite remarkable. And the reason why they can achieve this track record is because they had access, right? And the last step is if they want to become entrepreneurs, we should be able to write recommendation letters to angel investors and VCs saying, look, this is a teenager who's done all of those amazing things. I recommend you have a look at the entrepreneurship plan that he or she will have and you support or not. And if they want to do something non-profit, that they get the same recommendation letters to grant-giving foundations. So that's more or less what we're doing in terms of trying to accelerate the wisdom of teenagers around the world. Sorry if it took too long. Maybe it was not very wise of me to talk that much, but I'm very happy to have any questions answered.
I certainly didn't think you spoke too long, Marcelo, because I'm the mother of a 9-year-old going on 10, so I found it very fascinating. And, you know, especially when you started off with that first experience that you exposed your daughter to, I found myself wondering if I was brave enough and courageous enough to, you know, throw my daughter into those types of experiences. But it was very fascinating for me as a parent. I'm going to just have a look at the chat. I'm not seeing any questions. So this time, participants, please feel free to, you know, type your questions or your comments into the chat so that we can engage Marcelo a bit more. Marcelo, I know your program is so, I guess, fairly new, and then we had COVID, which would have interrupted, you know, the way you would have sort of envisioned the program continuing. But at this point, have you been able to yet to look back and sort of assess the success of the program to date? You know, has there yet been an opportunity to track, let's say, stories or any other sort of metrics that you might use, you know, at this point in the life of your nonprofit to see how it's working so far?
I'd say the most important KPI is that teenagers who joined the program just didn't want to go back home. They were like, you know, can I have another week? So that's a pretty good KPI when it comes to kids. But the one example that was quite remarkable is that during the second edition in 2020, there was a 15-year-old from Singapore, very bright boy who supported us with the online programs later, and a 17-year-old from Shanghai. And she had a franchise for bubble tea because the mother is an entrepreneur. So she had a lot of access and, of course, a huge market for bubble tea in China. So the mother was just supporting her to the stage in which she was doing so well, she could actually think about opening franchises in other countries. And right before COVID hit, they were about to sign an agreement. He was going to become her representative in Singapore. I mean, she's 17, he's 15. That's pretty good after 1 week spending time together. And knowing that both parents, they were fully supportive. Well, both, actually, all four parents would be very supportive because they sent their son and daughter to this kind of event. And if COVID hadn't happened, I wouldn't be surprised if he would have 20 distribution locations in Singapore and would be developing his own business. So this is a teenager that age 16 joined university online in Arizona because he wants to become a filmmaker. And in Singapore, you usually only get to university when you're 21 because you have to go and do military service and the school is very long. He was like, I want none of that. I'm 16, I want to be a filmmaker. Off we go. And he's with Arizona State now, which has an online program. And exactly because of COVID, it was facilitated. Like the university usually would say, no, you have to be here. I was like, no, I don't. In fact, I can't, right? Because of COVID. And the fact that he was 16 then became less of an issue. The big issue is that he actually had to study at 4 a.m. Singapore time. And he was willing to go through that challenge and go through the difficulties because he's so passionate about becoming a filmmaker, right? So there are lots of shortcuts that are not detrimental to your life. It's just like, no, I mean, he doesn't want to wait 5 years until he can finally follow his dreams. Like, that's the opportunity. I'm jumping into it. So I would say he's wiser for that.
Great, thank you. That was an amazing story. So I'm going to ask the participants to keep in mind questions they might have. You know, something you may have said, Marcelo, I'm sure would have piqued someone's interest. But we will get back to the Q&A in a while. But at this point, we're going to invite Alastair to join into the discussion. Again, Alastair also has sort of a very unique combination of interests. Professionally, I found it very fascinating. And I sort of stole a line of Alastair's LinkedIn profile, so I hope that's okay. And it says here that he designs priceless memories on the world's finest yachts, curating tailor-made luxury vacations and advising clients on super yacht purchases, sales, and new builds. that is very fascinating to me because I don't know anyone in the yacht business. And in addition to that, Alastair has managed to tap into that network of clients and yacht owners and other persons that he knows to build a network of philanthropists. And so we're going to ask Alastair to get into the conversation now and tell us all about, how he has been able to really to tap into his professional network and bring it to bear on his philanthropic route. Thank you, Alastair, for joining us today.
Thank you so much, and fascinating topic, Marcelo. Thank you for what you were explaining. Also, thank you to Peter for the invitation to join you all today. Yes, my name's Alastair, and thank you again for inviting me. Yeah, so I'm very fortunate. I have two main passions. One is my day job, which is the super yacht world of vacations and ownership and my background in design. But more recently and most importantly to me is my interest in philanthropy. And so I'll touch upon a little bit of both. And also I think it's very pertinent, the fact that yachting is intrinsic with the Caribbean region. We have lots of our yachts that visit regularly. It's the most beautiful cruising grounds. And so there's lots of synergies, which I'll also touch upon. But yeah, it was very interesting. I think for me, I realized that I had a bigger why than just my day job in yacht sales and charter vacations. When I had a very fortuitous opportunity to visit the Caribbean, and so it comes back in perhaps in full circle today. I was lucky to visit the Caribbean last February. One of my clients owns a private island, and they encouraged me to write my own eulogy. It's very humbling experience, and I encourage everyone to do the same if you haven't already. So the idea is try and imagine yourself at the age of 100 or whatever age it is. What do you want to have achieved, and what do you want to be remembered by? And so in order to achieve those goals, what do you want to have done in the next 20 years, 10 years, 5 years, or indeed the next 12 months? And so I really sort of narrowed down to that bigger picture and that helicopter view on my career and my life. And I realized, wow, I'm sitting in this extraordinary seat where daily, every day I'm speaking with my clients who are some of the best brains on the planet in different industries, different regions of the world, but many of whom are also philanthropic. And so I've loved to connect those dots over this time, for many years, but more recently, really realized I can join these dots and make these fabulous connections between clients who maybe would otherwise never have met. And I find that the most rewarding aspect of my role now is not necessarily the day job itself, but it's making these connections and enjoying my philanthropic work. I can't write the $1 million checks, but I know lots of people that can, and those that do enjoy doing incredible philanthropic work. And so I thought I'd touch upon a few of the areas that I personally got involved with, and just to help really shine a light on these young social entrepreneurs around the world, and the work that they're doing and the impact that they're making around the world. And so fairly recently, I've been working with an organization called the Queen's Commonwealth Trust. And so it's an official partnership that I've developed, and it's in the legacy of Her Majesty the Queen. We're working together in order to help curate these very special events, and this will be happening around the Commonwealth on board some of the yachts that our clients own, and they're available to basically use as a platform and as a vehicle in order to generate interest and awareness for these wonderful charities that we've been supporting. The Queen's Commonwealth Trust is an amazing organization, and they're certainly helping to put a lot of energy into the young social entrepreneurs around the world, from agriculture, education and employment, various environmental work and health. And they've gone on to do extraordinary work. One young leader I met with at St. James's Palace in March has created this charity that has saved 12,000 people from being human trafficked so far. And it's these sort of extraordinary entrepreneurs and leaders that I think we really must get behind. And I think some of the youngest brains on the planet are certainly going to be the most innovative and help solve some of these global issues. And so in some small way, if we can help fund and support and provide the infrastructure around their work, they can go on to scale it up in a sustainable way. There's another organization I've been supporting called Adoption Discovery. They're doing some wonderful work around the world. They're based in the US, but not exclusively to there. And the founder has helped to explain the process for those adults that want to become parents. Many think that it either costs too much money or it takes too long and is too complex in order to adopt. The founder has written a book and is basically funding. So for $0 in less than 9 months, people can become parents. And importantly, children find a loving home. And so these sort of organizations are doing fabulous work. And I just love to support where I can and join those dots. So I've got one client who, is themselves, they've adopted in the past, and then I can connect the dots and introduce them, and then now together they're going to do some wonderful things and do extraordinary work together. Aerial Recovery Group is an incredible organization. They're flying in these special forces, ex-Navy SEALs, and people that have retired from the military, but they're going into natural disasters, maybe after an earthquake or a hurricane, or indeed they're currently on the ground in the Ukraine crisis. They're saving children from being human trafficked. They've done extraordinary work, and they're helping to rebuild infrastructure after natural disasters or human-made disasters. And so again, with these amazing charities, it's incredibly rewarding and humbling when one can make a quick introduction and tap into my network of entrepreneurs. Sometimes they're first generation, or sometimes they're multi-generations of single families. And there's many people that want to give back and have sustainable impact investment. And so it's fabulous when I can begin to connect these dots. Win This Fight is an amazing organization founded by a multi-generational billionaire family, and they're doing some wonderful work. They're helping to end the crisis of human trafficking and human slavery. There's 40 million people who are currently enslaved around the world, and their preventative approach is helping to leverage technology and also end the anti-money laundering areas, which basically fuel the reason for human trafficking. And then on another area of my interest, of course, is working in the yacht industry, is the protection of the world oceans. So I love to support charities that do ocean conservation and looking after the planet from that side of things. Lots of owners of yachts use their yachts as platforms. Perhaps it's an explorer yacht and they can go and find new species or find new ways in which to protect the world's oceans. And so many people are involved in that aspect of yachting. There's a great organization called Yacht Aid Global. It's where owners can volunteer their yachts to go into very remote parts of the globe if after a tsunami or other natural disaster. And it's a lovely way of giving back, taking taking vital supplies to these very remote locations, using their yachts as a vehicle and as a platform to create water and all these life-saving elements that people need on the immediate aftermath of natural disasters. And so there's a huge organization for disaster relief to help with a sustainable impact around these coastal regions. And so yeah, I think the future generations absolutely endorse what Marcelo was talking about, how there are so many young, brilliant minds out there. And if we can do what we can to support them, help fund them, nurture them, mentor them. I've been very fortunate in my life and my career to meet some extraordinary people. I benefited as a youth myself to learn from some of the the most extraordinary conservationists and people who are passionate about ocean conservation and sustainability. And that's the reason for my background and my work. And I love to give back. And so I think it's all our responsibility to help nurture the next generation and see what we can do to support them and help them achieve their dreams and help them innovate. After all, if it can be a sustainable approach, and if we can look after the planet in the same time, looking at the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals, I think it's certainly going to be a better planet and one that I'm really excited to support where I can. So yeah, just a few comments and a few words from my perspective. But as you can see, I've had the opportunity to stand on the shoulders of giants, and I'm very honored to have met the people that I've worked with and built relationships with through my day job. But now it gives me enormous pleasure when I can join those dots and connect these people to each other to help solve and begin to make a positive impact on some of the globe's most pressing issues. So thank you again for the opportunity to say a few words, and thank you for the discussion today. It's fabulous to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alastair. I really like that the tagline you've been using, was connecting the dots, and I could see that being, like the name of an organization or program or movement. And what I like about it is that it's something that every one of us can do, because we all have, that group of people that we interact with, or, that we have influence over. And, there's always that opportunity to just find, identify the synergies, between those different persons that we know, that we interact with. So at this point, I'm inviting participants, to please shoot your questions to either Alastair or Marcelo onto the chat. And while I'm just waiting for our first brave person to pop a question onto the chat. Alastair, can I just ask you as well?
Jovan, may I just ask you to invite Peter in, because I know that Peter would have some questions for these two gentlemen as well. And as Peter joins, I just want to ask a question of Marcelo in particular, because I have found that that age group he has chosen to be a very interesting one. That 13 to 17 year age group, which is generally a time when they're not interested in mentorship because they're interested in peer development. So how have you been able to get past that particular issue? How do you address it? And then we go to Peter.
Oh, it's easy. I'm not their dad, so they actually listen to what I'm saying. My own daughter would never follow my advice. I guess it's the same thing with moms, but we try to establish a dynamic during our events in which, to participate, the teenagers must come with one of the parents, the mom or the dad. And we try to have the layer of parents of bright, motivated teenagers also becoming friends and developing an international, a new set of relationships. And we ended up having really interesting connections where the mother of one is giving advice to the son of another, right? So you just want to make sure that the wires cross nicely, and they are curious by nature, and they will be very keen on listening to people who are not one of the parents. And the other thing that was quite interesting is that I tried to have a mix, and I would like to bring that topic later on to the follow-up discussion, mixing wealthy and not so wealthy kids, right? I had $50,000 from a sponsor. So every single participant, multimillionaires or no, those that actually needed help with every single cent, they paid below cost, right? So the ones who could pay a bit more, they paid a bit more. The ones who needed support, they had the full support because they had the sponsorship. And there was a case of this very bright boy from Tel Aviv who needed to be fully sponsored. His father could not even speak English. As in, someone in Israel who doesn't speak English, that's rare. And you would be surprised that the son started developing apps when he was 10, and by the time he was 14, he was elected Forbes 30 under 30, and he is like hanging out to Jack Ma from Alibaba. I mean, he is definitely outstanding, but he's poor. Like he is an entrepreneur. He doesn't have the money. The family is very simple. So he needed a kind of help. And I thought that, okay, I want to see how that happens, right? Because there are quite a few wealthy kids. Like one of them, the daughter of, let's say, the ultra high net worth responsible director of a very large Swiss bank. So they do not seem to have an issue with liquidity. And the dynamic that was the most interesting is that when I introduced this genius from Tel Aviv to the group, and he explained that they started developing apps, the immediate reaction is prove it. Like, it's like, no, can't be true. Like, you cannot possibly have developed apps when you're so young. And he just went there and said, go to the App Store, download it, and started testing it. So he establishes social credibility. And the fact that he didn't have money was irrelevant, right? So the daughter of the wealthiest person in that group, other than the daughter of the sponsor, I believe that is wealthier. I mean, it's almost irrelevant at some point. So the daughter of one of the wealthiest participants, parents in this case, was the one telling the group that she was really worried because she was already 13 and she was nowhere close to becoming Forbes 30 under 30 when she should be 14. So the wealth element dissipated. It was about merit, right? It's like you're that good, you get respect. And you end up having a triangulation that is a valuable framework, right? People usually from a young age, they want to have respect of the peers, and that's influence, right? It's not like you need to have money to get that respect. If you sing really well, everybody loves you, and it could be another skill set that is valued by your peer group. You have influence, and that goes on to adult age. Then you start having money, which is relevant. Sometimes it's inherited, sometimes it's something that's self-acquired. And then you have power, right? Teenagers are not very powerful. They don't have armies. They don't have people working for them. So they have to focus on influence. They want to be cool, right? And if they have money, the dollars are not in their name. So influence is really, really important for the teenagers. And then it starts sort of dissipating, and all of a sudden we focus more on making money and being powerful, depending on what people are looking for. And what I'm trying to achieve long term is to make sure that the teenagers, like this boy from Tel Aviv, who's absolutely brilliant. I mean, there's another boy from Singapore who was the second youngest person ever to pass the Cambridge University maths test. He was 9 years old, right? And they're all there for a week, building igloos and learning how to rescue someone from an avalanche and doing cool things and meeting amazing people, and magic ensues, right? So the element that I see, and we're asking about KPIs, and I mentioned the story of the boy from Singapore almost becoming the franchise owner of the bubble tea company. But what I would really like to see is in 10, 15, 20 years, that the wealthy individuals, because they inherited the wealth, or they just happen to be amazing entrepreneurs, they have a deep bond with the deeply talented, technical people. I mean, it could be a CTO, CIO, it could be any other senior role, but those teenagers that do not have the money to be able to do certain things, that do not have access to just knock on the door of the friends and say, I need a $5 million capital injection, and then make a few phone calls, and you have hedge fund managers or family offices facilitating. But you need the technical talent, and I want to make sure that they work together beautifully, and that depends on trust. And this trust should be fostered by starting the relationship while they're still teenagers. And then 10 years later, you go like, oh, I've known you for such a long time. We only had good experiences. Of course, we should be doing something together. Then you have the technical genius with no dollars to his or her name, meeting the son of the hedge fund manager from Connecticut, and they will be able to have a massive impact because together they can do so much more. So this happening right now, right? I worked with a colleague when I was doing business development 15 years ago. He is Ukrainian, very, very smart, speaks English really well, and he's now my country manager. My nonprofit that is bringing telecommunications to the front line in Ukraine obviously needed a local person. I cannot be there, and I don't speak Ukrainian to start with. And I've known him for so long and only had great experiences traveling together, giving those presentations to governments and so on. I was like, of course, like I trust this person more than would trust someone with even better qualifications that I never worked with before. So I'm trying to create this magical chemical mix of saying, let's get them to know each other when they're really young, and then we'll let the universe decide how value is going to be created from those relationships. So I can't measure it, I just know it's good, which is why I'm willing to do it.
Thank you, Marcelo. Peter, would you care to join in the conversation? Any comments or questions you might have for either of our speakers?
Well, look, thank you very much. And a big thank you to Marcelo and of course to Alastair for their absolutely enthralling and intriguing comments. I think we're obviously seeing what just by being here, the amazing power that philanthropy and a social impact focused mindset makes for everyone. And what you actually find is the more you give, the more you actually end up receiving in return. So of course, these other initiatives we've discussed, of course, around structuring, attracting ultra high net worth individuals, investments, business, all of that, that's great. But one key thing that I've learned from many years in this space of family office, ultra high net worth and high finance, is if you can touch the heart of a person and form a movement around what touches the heart of the masses most, then that is actually what people seem to remember with a much more deeper focus. And when you can create an alignment of interests, alignment of values, and an alignment of an integrity-based community, that is what keeps you strong during times of scarcity or weakness. And I've noticed the COVID situation really proved that for many people. And I've had this discussion many times over, that certain organizations or individuals that perhaps didn't have that same like-minded alignment sort of shed away, and many other parties they ended up becoming better and more closely aligned to during that major test. But getting back to, of course, firstly, Marcelo's discussion, again, thoroughly felt that this was one of the highest priorities that the Caribbean needs to look at, is on the youth mentorship, because again, this whole conference is, of course, almost like to bring global experts to give you a new perspective of how the world, what's happening in the world, and you can make a decision with these leaders on where to take the Caribbean in the direction that you feel is most apt. But the key thing that makes it sustainable into the long term is the next generation. What are they going to learn from these grand masters of excellence? And what Marcelo was doing is it is extraordinary, an amazing platform and opportunity for everyone, which is not just on one sort of trade or one sort of specific discipline. It's actually bringing the brightest and best, even to be around the global leaders. And I can't think off the top of my head from a publicly known perspective anywhere greater than Davos to be doing that and interfacing such people. If you want to create the next generation of leaders, it's best for them to learn from the present generation of leaders and then form their own strengths around that. So for that, Marcelo, I'm greatly thankful for that component. I'd love for you to elaborate, Marcelo, a little bit. Okay, now that you're getting a bit of a feel of what we're trying to accomplish with the Great Wealth Transfer, and of course, your experience with cultivating the next generation, are there any key ideas you think that the Caribbean, knowing full well that there's quite a lot of diversity within the Caribbean region, but if they were to unify their interests in governance, and this is what the CCGI is all about, it's about finding these areas of alignment between the Caribbean. What would you recommend that they would do to cultivate that next generation, and how they could align with great leaders like you and the global leaders to more effectively create collaboration, co-creation, and of course, co-elevating one another into the next generation?
Thanks, Peter. And thanks again for inviting me to join the session today. It's really a pleasure. My suggestion goes back to the keyword access. So you want to make sure that if you have an initiative, and I prefer nonprofit to start with, because the cost of failure is reduced, like people are more lenient, so to say, than shareholders of following quarterly statements. So I do believe that if you could get more teenagers from the Caribbean to join nonprofits and try to understand the mechanisms of how value is created in an environment where almost by definition people are very caring, they will have the skill sets to then start doing something a little bit different, hopefully in the social enterprise scale, not just hardcore capitalism, right? So if they start with this more humanistic perspective, they learn from very caring people, and they get the toolkit that allows them to join the workforce very well prepared. I think there will be better humans in general, and if you can do this virtually, as we were suggesting with the internships of our program, all the better, because then it starts younger. One of the concerns when you're a teenager is that you can't travel, right? You need to have all sorts of authorizations, and then there are major concerns. They were talking about human trafficking before, Alastair. I think this is something that I'm definitely paranoid about. So when we are proposing the internships, they will be with carefully curated companies, preferably those owned or managed by our speakers, so we know who they are. No, they are parts of the Gracie family. And the parents should be the supervisors, saying it is important for the teenagers to have that exposure to how the world works. So they should be signing a contract. Like they may be 15, but they're saying, I'm committing to 4 hours a week for a period of 3 months, and that's the internship. And mom or dad or both will be the supervisors, making sure they deliver on their commitment. And this is my suggestion, right? Try to get them involved in nonprofit efforts. Try to figure out how they can trigger that passion and purpose, means things that they care about, which as I mentioned before, first session we had today, it could be about rescuing deers because you saw Bambi's mother being shot in the Disney movie. So whatever would trigger a very strong emotional response, try to get them involved, saying, okay, this is not a joke, right? This is serious. You're signing a contract to be part of the journey, and the people who are here, they have a large cost of opportunity to do nonprofit work. It basically means that you're not doing something that could be generating capital. So the teenagers should be involved, but they have to have this very strong emotional element. And from there, they'll just have a bigger and broader scope of options in life, which is one of the outcomes of wisdom, right? You just make better choices. And I think that this is what you need to focus on. But the emotional component is really important. They must care about it.
No, indeed. And my second part is, of course, just a question for Alastair. Of course, you've got the privileged position, of course, with a great relationship with, of course, the Queen's Commonwealth Trust, and trusted by them, of course, to cultivate their philanthropic interests on a global scale. And you're also, as well, with a British background, now, of course, based in South Florida. So again, a major hub for your day job, but also it's attracting enormous amount of influx of migration, internal migration from the United States, from places such as California, New York City in the north, because Texas and Florida attract a lot of the local ultra high net worth community. But with your knowledge, of course, of the yachting world, you're more au fait than many on the Caribbean. And you're tapped into the mindset of these world-leading philanthropists and social impactors with the means and the mindset and the heart for this focus. What do you think is missing from the conversation that the Caribbean should try to focus on learning more on? And how can they enable great people like you and the leaders you're affiliated with to further these causes for a mutual win-win?
Thank you, Peter. Great questions. I think it's perhaps looking at examples and to benchmark best practices and replicating that sort of system. And so obviously the Queen's Commonwealth Trust focuses primarily around the Commonwealth and the work of young social entrepreneurs, some of which are obviously countries within the Caribbean. And so there's certainly ways we can work with young leaders to maximize their impact. I think that the Caribbean itself is a extraordinary location, both geographically in terms of its physical position between the US and Europe, but also importantly, it's an opportunity to become a new magnet for investment, for looking at global solutions and scaling it up. And so after a natural disaster, after sadly we saw Irma go through the Caribbean a few years ago, you can learn best practices, realize how you can rebuild infrastructure of a whole island, and then use that and replicate that. And sure enough, a couple of years later, one of my clients scaled that again further after the earthquake in Haiti. And so what they learned from rebuilding a country in the Caribbean, a few years later, they used again after an earthquake in another country. And so I think there's numerous ways we can support the region of the Caribbean, but also look at other best practices from other countries. And it obviously doesn't have to be just the Commonwealth itself, but certainly from my viewpoint of working with the ultra high net worth community, there are so many who want to give back, and there are so many who want to invest with that social conscience and impact investment importantly in a sustainable way. And so if we can support the next generations coming up with their fantastic solutions and innovations, I'm sure there's ways in which we can continue their efforts and make it sustainable for many generations to come. And I know there's lots of people in my network alone that would love to help mentor and support both financially, but also open doors and be able to support those that are doing some incredible work. Yeah, it's very rewarding to personally be involved, but also to see from afar how this work is impacting importantly right on the ground for the people that need it most. If I can do a small part to help with that, I find that terrifically rewarding. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Alastair. Peter, would you like to add anything further?
No, I don't want to hog the floor, so to speak, because this stimulated so much discussion. But yeah, I could certainly go on and on and on. Okay, maybe I could put just one final point, and then I'll leave it for everyone else. But yeah, there's a big movement towards sort of social impact investment, ESG, and the definitions of which that we're looking at now. Marcelo, I know you obviously we're talking more about the mentorship component here, but I know you're involved in many charitable initiatives. I mean, what do you think that those with also investment capital want to invest to gain something back can also do to empower humanity in alignment with a lot of these philanthropists that are just willing to give away? What do you think the impact investment world, which have even more capital, and the institutions can do alongside and in parallel to assist parties such as yourself and the philanthropic world more effectively?
Very good point. Great question. And the angle that is worth sharing here is that if you have a charitable effort and people are willing to give you money, is because you're creating a lot of value, right? So if they're investing and they want to get 15% returns, there are lots of spreadsheets involved. If you're basically saying villages in Ukraine are being bombed, connectivity is over, they lost their schools because there were fires during battles, and people give you money to address that issue, it's clearly a segment that has commercial value, because even as a nonprofit, it's worth doing. So what I would love to see the younger generations doing is participating in these projects that raise the capital as nonprofit initiatives, and then we shift to social enterprise, right? So one of the things that we could consider is like, okay, we're bringing the connectivity to places like Ukraine during the war, to remote locations. Now the Starlink, the satellite via internet that Elon Musk came up with, works so wonderfully well. And let's just try to make sure that we facilitate also the process of young entrepreneurs setting up these kind of solutions in places like Tonga that had a massive earthquake and tsunami, and they were completely cut off, right? Starlink is not active there, so it was not possible last year, but it will be in the future. So I think it's really important to use the philanthropic dollars as seed capital for giant value creation opportunities. And the private sector, as mentioned in the sessions earlier on, is so much better than the government are doing this, because you can have the gut feeling that I'm experiencing now. The funds that we raised for Ukraine so far, they came from people who made a lot of money with technology. And when they see the pitch deck, they go like, that's where I want my money to go, because I know that I can check on a desktop dashboard exactly where my donation is. They will see a little dots, tagged by GPS, showing that the Wi-Fi system they donated is in Ukraine, is not somewhere else, right? Which is something that can happen with food, with clothes. It ends up in the black market. So people who understand technology, they understand also what kind of impact they have, and they're reassured because they know there is governance. And of course, governance is a massive element of importance in the conversation we're having today. But I think that the most important element, answering your question, is to make sure that we use philanthropic dollars as a lever to be able to create socially responsible enterprises in the future that will be great jobs that people really want to have, because they feel it's very meaningful. It's like, not only it's doing well by doing good, which is repeated quite often, but it's actually a reality. Lots of people have these kind of jobs that desperately passionate about the work they do, and they happen to make a living out of it. Isn't that wonderful? Wouldn't that be even more wonderful if more people could have these kind of setups in their lives?
And I think you totally grasped that point. I couldn't have said, no one could have said it better, Marcelo, because they're fiercely passionate about their jobs. And that's where I think that this impact investment in ESG aligned with philanthropy has an interesting synergy. They are separate silos. However, there's such a huge pile of money in the alternative investment category now that it has to seek returns. If it's an impact investment where they can lose it or make it, okay, 1% of the family's wealth can go towards that impact investment, and they feel that they've done good even if it makes or lose money. But when it's a situation where you're looking at that preservation capital or other alternatives, you look at where private equity was, venture capital was, hedge funds were maybe 25, 30 years ago. They grew, and I see social impact investing, which is now in the 700 to 800 billion range from studies by Gin. I think that could be an area to grow substantially. And I use this example. Imagine you've got two identical twins. They each inherit 100 million. One puts together a purely philanthropic sort of foundation. The other one puts the philanthropic foundation, but says, okay, under our governance, we're going to, of course, 20% of everything here is going to be allocated to purely philanthropic initiatives. We're giving that away under a very specific criteria, but that 80% is going to be invested into social impact investments and social enterprise where a return is sought. But a minimum of half of those returns and dividends are going to be put back to philanthropy, and half of those are going to be put back. And there's divisions and models you could look at. It'd be interesting to see where in 20, 30, or even 50 years, where each foundation would be. Because what a lot of people don't necessarily understand is a lot of the biggest foundations in the world, the universities, the endowments, they actually invest as well. A lot of these proceeds as well, get a return, and then put some of that to work philanthropically. And so understanding and us getting a grasp on that model more effectively, I think is a key discussion point of governance. And because you already are a major home of many funds, such as, I use the Cayman example. Every second discussion I have when we're structuring a fund, Cayman is always brought up in that discussion pretty much. I think this is an area on this proper structuring of impact investments, ESG, and foundations in this new trajectory is an interesting topic. But the foundations and the heart and the soul and the empowerment of it, I think Marcelo and of course Alastair have really touched upon tremendously today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter and Marcelo, for that contribution to our discussion. I saw a comment was posted by one of our participants a few minutes ago, Azam, and I'm going to read the comment. And Azam, when I'm finished reading, I will invite you if you would like to ask any follow-up questions, or if anyone else would like to maybe then comment on Azam's contribution. So Azam said, the Generation Zs always mention they live for happiness. and would rather be jobless than be in a job that doesn't make them happy. Yet this new generation seems to have more mental health issues. The mentorship, entrepreneurship, and internship initiatives, which is what Marcelo spoke about, I think goes beyond just developing careers, in that it gives purpose to young minds for better emotional intelligence development, pursuit of happiness, and developing resiliency. The Caribbean can greatly benefit from much more of such initiatives, and it is awesome that such a framework exists that can be emulated. So that was an excellent contribution. Azam, would you like to add anything to that comment that you shared with us? Hopefully Azam is...
I'll let Alastair have his opinion, because I've been doing this for so long. I need fresh perspectives.
No, absolutely.
Alastair, sure. Alastair, sure, no problem.
Only to say, I think it's absolutely endorse it and echo a lot of what's been said. I think you know, the next generation really is our future. We have to look after it and help every generation after us. And so if we can support them in all these different areas that Zam has mentioned, I think it's something that should be celebrated. And I'm absolutely supportive of not just you know, the Caribbean region, but globally. There's so much we can do, and if we can help in some small part, I think that will be incredibly rewarding.
I agree. Sure, Kamala, please go ahead.
Yeah, what I'd like to ask Alastair, because I was quite intrigued by his start when he spoke about going through this process of writing a eulogy and then looking back at what are the things he wanted to achieve at different stages of his life. And I was curious to know, like, at what was the earliest stage you wish, you know, you could have done something? Because I'm actually merging two things: that experience you went through, and then something that was shared with us by Marcelo, where part of that whole growth process for young people is to have them say, if you can go back to speak to yourself, you have a half hour to go back and, you know, talk to yourself about something you'll do differently. So, you know, for you, how was that experience, and at what age would you have gone back to do something differently?
Fascinating question. I'd probably have to give it a little more thought, but my initial response would be certainly the process itself was very humbling and certainly very thought-provoking to write one's own eulogy. I think for me, I'd go back to various points in my life. There was one of the most famous and celebrated professional sailors around the world was called Sir Peter Blake. Sadly, he lost his life, but he was a professional sailor. I had the good fortune and honor to meet with him. He taught me how to sail, and that's the reason I'm in the yacht industry today. He was New Zealand's most celebrated sportsman, won the America's Cup several times around the world, sailor, etc. Anyway, he then went into his interest in sustainability and ocean conservation. He realized that over the years of him doing these round the world races, perhaps he saw the climate change. He realized, you know, the albatross that were quite regularly being sighted, he very rarely saw again. And so he realized things had to be done. And that, from the age of 6 or 7, really shone a light on my childhood about what sustainability really is. And probably since then, that sort of fueled my passion for sustainability. I then combined it with my interest in yacht design. I then did a concept called Soliloquy, the super green super yacht. And it was to try and prove a point to the world that you can have eco luxury. The most luxurious item on the planet is arguably a super yacht. But why can't we make it sustainably designed in a holistic design approach and minimize any detrimental environmental impact? And so it was incorporating that passion of sustainability, yachting and design. And perhaps it was a bit of ahead of the curve 10 years ago, but now I'm delighted to see a lot of our industry are talking about it and developing yachts that are more sustainable and doing some good things in that area. So that was probably a major sort of moment in my life when I met Sir Peter Blake. And then, yeah, more recently, this mentor of mine who owns this private island to write one's own eulogy was a very important moment for me, and made me realize I'm in a unique situation where I can help my clients who are already philanthropists or want to give back, and help join those dots, as I was saying earlier. And it's incredibly humbling and rewarding when I can help with that. So yeah, lots of wonderful topics to discuss, and I wish we had more time, but thank you for the question.
Yes. All right. And I have a follow-up question as well, Jovan, for Marcelo. Marcelo, I realize we're losing you a little bit. It's getting dark where you are there in Davos. But I was curious to know of all these young people who you would have done that particular exercise with, where you tell them they have a half hour to go back to themselves and speak. Have you found any commonality in terms of what is that age that they wish they knew things differently, that they would have made a different decision? You know, is it as young as 10 and 12, or are they all looking at by the age of 15 that they would have made a different choice?
Well, the commonalities, because I had almost 500 sessions and I moderated all of them myself, right? So I'm the only person who has seen all the trends. And I'd say it's more along the lines of things they wish they had done more rather than less. So it's about being proactive and experimenting. It's about asking for help. Don't be ashamed of showing that you're ignorant, because being ignorant and being stupid are very different things. I mean, we are all ignorant about so many things, and teenagers are very self-conscious, right? So that was a key element of, well, I should have asked more questions. I should have volunteered more. It comes back so often. They should have helped a nonprofit initiative that they became aware of much later on. And probably because of the intergenerational issues of the mom and dad saying, maybe you should try that, and they do exactly the opposite, they ended up not doing something that would have been a great component of their life. So it's about the doing part, right? It's having the access, but also having the motivation to be able to experiment with new emotions, meet new people. And this is what I say is a summary of the 500 conversations. Like, they should have been more out there in the world rather than being so worried about what other people are thinking of who they are and what they're doing.
Good. Thank you, Marcelo. And Kamala, did that answer your question? Yes.
Yes, but I was more blown away by the fact that he said he moderated all 500 sessions.
Yes,
at that point, my mind was just processing that.
Because this being my first experience as a moderator, you need to make sure you listen to everything that's being said, because you don't want to miss anything. So, so Marcelo, yes, I may come to you for some tips, if I want to repeat this sometime in the future.
I can give you tips about lighting, right? So your light is much better than mine, but I can give you tips about many other things.
Yes. So we have about 10 minutes or 12 minutes or so left in our session. So, I am going to ask our two speakers, just to share some closing remarks, some brief closing remarks. But at this time, it would be sort of the last opportunity if anyone, and if our participants would like to ask a quick question, now would be the perfect time, because you don't want to miss that opportunity. I just want to make a quick comment as well to Marcelo with regards to your program. And a couple of times you mentioned the parents being involved, and I felt that was very relevant in a Caribbean context, because this is a generalization, but I think I can safely say that a lot of Caribbean parents are very protective, and children, teenagers even are quite sheltered. And so the sort of exposure that we would want to give our teens and our youth through programs like Accelerator, I think it's good that there is some level of parental involvement, to give the Caribbean conservative, overprotective parents some comfort in terms of what their child is going to be exposed to, but also so that the parents also can really learn to broaden their own horizons and their expectations for their children, and what their children can actually achieve. So I thought that was very relevant in our cultural context in particular. So
There was one thing that was really quite remarkable. We created a round table so the teenagers in Davos, they would sit in the rectangle shape because we couldn't do the round table with the space we had. And the parents could sit on the back, but they're not allowed to ask any questions until all the teenagers had finished their questions. So it's a reversal of roles where the parents are the ones waiting for the teenagers to express their opinions. And what I noticed that many of the parents are coming to me later said, I had no idea my daughters were so smart. I had no idea they had evolved so much and mature so much, because parents day in, day out, they're saying, don't do this, do that, wake up, get ready. And they don't get to see the elements of maturity that have developed, because that's something that does not impact their daily lives as much. And when they are put into this reversal role kind of situation, they start respecting their children much more. And children who feel respected, they're more respectable. They can bear more. They can try new things because they feel that they have the backing of the parents. And that was kind of the little cherry on top of the whole experience. Like, oh, okay, I was not planning for that. I'm really happy that happened.
Definitely. I can definitely see that being as one of the as you said, the rewards of the experience. Alastair, can I invite you just to present any closing comments you might have as we wrap up the afternoon's discussion?
Yeah, thank you. It's been absolutely fascinating. 3 days of conversation. I've enjoyed the other previous days and obviously today as well. Enjoyed being a part of it. I think mentoring the future generation is probably the most important thing we can all do. After all, it's in their safe and capable hands in the future, and if we can help nurture, guide, and support them, what could be better? I for one certainly want to leave this planet in a more sustainable fashion for my children's generation and theirs to come. And so if we can combine our synergies and our networks, in my case, super yacht enthusiasts, whether they're owners or charter clients, many of whom are also incredibly philanthropic. Many don't want to be named. Many are anonymous, but incredibly supportive of numerous charities around the world, and the work that these charities and organizations are doing is quite extraordinary. And so if we can help the next generation, certainly they're the innovators and leaders of the future. So I think it's extraordinarily exciting, and I'm looking forward to helping where I can. And thank you again for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you so much, Alastair. And I just want to say thank you again so much for being here with us today and for your contribution to our very engaging and interesting discussion. And I would want to challenge the participants, and I challenge myself to really to emulate you, Alastair, in terms of making those connections. I think we are all in a place where we can, and sometimes we don't think about it, or we might be a little passive about it. But I think certainly if we can get a little more active, of recognizing where synergies might be, so that we can make those connections, we can definitely make the Caribbean a better place. Marcelo, would you like at this point to just wrap things up as well with any further comments as we close up our discussion?
Well, I just want to show that I'm still here. This is not a recorded message. This is a live from my phone.
I was going to say, Marcelo, we can't see you, but we know that you're there. Yeah. We're seeing the silhouette of the trees behind you, but we're not seeing you.
But it's great. I think it's a conversation that should never stop. You should welcome new voices. Perhaps you could consider hosting an event for teenagers, saying, look, this is the meaning of governance. I mean, how governance impacts your life. Like, it's just really about being in control and being serene, knowing that the decisions you're making will have positive consequences. And this is something that teenagers don't get very often, right? They just have this regimented school program that is kind of a method of societal control. Otherwise, they'll be out there in the streets rampaging. So I'm very grateful that schools do exist. I just want to go beyond. I think governance is an amazing topic. It's a little bit dry if you just read the definition. But if you understand the consequences, I think it can be very exciting, and it will be very, very interesting for teenagers, especially those who want to get into politics. And no, it's hard to figure out that you want to get into politics, that you want to be of service. So if you would like to consider hosting an event that is focused on teenagers and governance, I'd be very happy to participate and support in any way I can.
Thank you so much, Marcelo. And again, for your very thought-provoking presentation. And participants, I would urge you, to look at the website of Marcelo's accelerator program. I'm sure we all know teenagers that, have the potential to really benefit from a program like this. So it is definitely something worth looking into, and perhaps we will have a Caribbean edition, someday very soon. I would just want to wrap things up by just reading a last comment that was just posted on the chat, which was from Azam again. And Azam said, another perceived benefit of the acceleration programs is creating frames of references from success stories and overcoming challenges that can motivate future actions and choices. Azam, I agree 100%. I think those success stories are very important in really motivating and inspiring others. And even the ones that Marcelo would have shared about really, inspired me. So with that said, I just want to thank the CCGI again for asking me to be moderator of this afternoon's panel discussion. And I would ask Kamla if she has any closing comments as we end this panel and get ready for a third and final panel in half an hour's time.